Vice President Kamala Harris was born in the United States and moved to Canada when she was about 5 years old. So, how Canadian is she? Vem Miller is founder of the America Happens Network, joining me now to discuss. Vem, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on your show, Stacey. I really appreciate it.
So, I got to tell you, I was enthralled the other morning. Emma Joe from Breitbart grew up in the same neighborhood in Vancouver as Vice President Harris. And she was talking
Mhm.
about what an idyllic neighborhood it is, how it's a part of Canada that actually isn't touched by racial strife or animus. It's a very diverse community. It's upscale, beautiful schools, leafy neighborhoods, nannies out with babies in carriages, really the kind of place you would kind of make a movie about. And this is where Kamala Harris and her sister Maya grew up with their mom was a professor there and a scientist. And so I keep thinking about how that looks in my mind and the images I've seen of Vancouver, which is a beautiful, glittering city. And then comparing that to what Kamala Harris says about how she's been racially oppressed, I don't see those two things meshing together.
Yeah, I mean, once you research Kamala's background, you really find out that she is a bit of a chameleon. I mean, I hate to use strong words, but she's a liar. She lies. You know, she grew up in an idyllic place in Canada. She studied in Montreal, and I believe this had a great amount of influence on her. See, I was raised in Los Angeles. I was actually born in Canada, in Toronto, but I grew up in LA, and I foolishly thought that Canada is basically USA light. And I spent a very brief period of time in my adult years as a film and television producer in Toronto, Canada. And in all frankness, I was horrified because what you find out when you're living in Canada is no, they don't have a constitution that mirrors ours. Really, what they have is something called the Canadian Charter of Rights, which is a watered down version of the Constitution, very malleable. Rather than saying, hey, you got freedom of speech, freedom of press, they say you have freedom of expression. But the way it's written, it could be taken back by people that are authoritarian, people that are in power. And just like we're seeing Justin Trudeau right now, where he's jailing individuals for their freedoms, what we consider our most basic freedoms under the US Constitution, in Canada, he's able to get away with it. So I think there's a huge warning here in terms of somebody that is Canadian educated trying to influence US politics, because that is only going to lead to the road to tyranny if we decide to go down that road as a population.
Oh my gosh, Bem. So you have beautifully elucidated the issues with her candidacy. I mean, obviously, this is a kind of I keep reminding myself that if Democrats had been honest with themselves, their party, and America a year ago when they began their primary process, which they truncated, they didn't want primary challenge to President Biden. If they hadn't done that, Harris would have announced her candidacy then. And then you would have
Mhm.
had all of the other people who are like the top 10 of the Democrats, they all would have announced as well. They would have had a real primary battle.
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
the
and what
main
we're
reason
seeing.
they didn't want that is because they wanted to prosecute Trump and they wanted all attention on his cases. And that's why they didn't have a primary process, which in turn they shot themselves in the foot.
Yeah, I mean it's the ugliest looking thing. I mean, this is the Democrat Party claiming to be about freedoms, yet in a very dictator-like style, they install Kamala Harris. A lot of people would argue that the entire 2020 election was an installation of a president as opposed to a free and fair election. And what we're really seeing is we're seeing the United States become Brussels. For those that don't know, research how these unelected officials are controlling the entirety of Europe through these people being appointed as opposed to being elected. And that's what we're seeing in the United States, only it's happening to our presidency. I mean, this should be very scary to people. This is the road to authoritarianism, where you have a major candidate that wasn't even put in there by the people.
Yeah, and so, Vem, the comparisons to places around the world means nothing new under the sun. We can look around and see how this works out. The comparison to Justin Trudeau is very apt because he was younger, right? Commercially attractive. I'm not talking about my personal feelings here. I'm just saying, people would say, "Oh, he's a young, attractive guy." He
Yeah.
represents the future, right? These are the kinds of things that were said about Justin Trudeau. He's younger, he's more in tune with, the bulk of the population. He has new ideas, he's fresh, he's going to bring new eyes to government. He'll bring solutions, kind of not based on his track record or his history, but based on how he looks. We're seeing the same thing in this 90-day instant campaign. It's like a cup of noodles campaign for Kamala Harris. We have 90 days in which to believe that these images of her talking on the phone and walking and looking nice in a suit and smiling a lot and looking like someone that lives down the street from you who, manages an HR department somewhere. She looks so mainstream and so innocuous, so unthreatening. There's no history of mean tweets or anything like that. But she's actually quite radical in her viewpoint. She believes in socialism, open borders. She's lax on crime. She thinks people who've been arrested for property destruction and vandalism should be released from prison, and she helps raise money for them. She's pro-abortion up until, the ninth month. There's some real problems with her and mainstream Americans actually like for her to be the candidate for regular people.
Yeah, yeah. I want to talk about something that is not often talked about in terms of Kamala Harris, and that is the fact that Kamala Harris comes from a family where her father was alienated when she was 7 years old due to the California divorce courts, which are basically communist divorce courts, very much like in Canada. So from the age of 7, she was separated from her father, right? Now let's follow that line of thought when she is now a prosecutor, and she knows that a lot of black men are actually innocent of the crimes, but nonetheless, she lets them rot in jail because that was what was beneficial to her career and not righteousness, right? So now she's claiming she's a black candidate. A lot of people are saying, she's actually of Indian and Jamaican descent. I don't even want to get into the topic of whether that's black or not, right? But the topic I like to get into is the way she treats men. We saw this with Kavanaugh. We saw this really in her dialogue of what she thinks about men. And it's very hard for me to be convinced that this person, because of her own experiences, because of her own damages as a child of not growing up with her father, it's hard to see how that doesn't influence her today. Because just by virtue of leaving these black men who she knew are innocent in jail, and also talking about families in a very authoritarian style, like the government is the family, I think whatever happened to her in her childhood, whatever was her experiences, really affects her until today. And this is why she's a chameleon. I don't think Kamala even knows who she is. She talks in a Southern accent in front of Southern blacks, like as if she's Southern. She's up north. All of a sudden, her Canadian twang comes out. I mean, I don't think Kamala Harris knows who she is. I think she is power hungry. I think her past has indicated that she will use that power to unjustly attack people. I think the Kavanaugh confirmation is a great example of that. I think her attacks on Donald Trump are an example of that. Just like she uses this divide and conquer strategy using race, she does the exact same thing with sexes. And we cannot afford to have this divide and conquer type individual, because this is a time of unity where we need to reclaim our most basic constitutional rights.
Oh my gosh. So Vem, 100%. But I have to ask the follow-on question, and this has been something that's on my mind. I'm a mom. I remember distinctly the day I gave birth to our oldest child, and I felt like I crossed over into something different that day. It was everything that went before that day. That was the first stage of my life. And then everything that
Hmm.
came after is the stage of my life that I continue to be in, which is I'm a mother. It informs
Hmm.
every decision that I make, and it took my focus off of myself. I didn't think of myself as being self-centered before I became a mom, but I know I'm not self-centered now because there's no way to be self-centered as a mother if you're a good mom. And so
Yes.
Kamala doesn't have that experience. Do you think that also stems from the childhood that you just described there?
Exactly, 100%. Like she is not given, once you give birth to a child, okay, all these, nonsensical things like divide and conquer strategies, hating men, being, super third wave feminist type, all that stuff goes away because women give birth to both men and women, right? They give both birth to both male and female children, and your thoughts change in terms of what the world needs because now you're a protector of what is on this planet. Now, without that, and again, this goes down to the family courts as well. You have family court judges that are not parents that are adjudicating upon the future of children. All this stuff is off whack. And a person running for president that doesn't have children, I think inherently there's something off about that. That's not ever going to be my favorite candidate. In fact, I would vote for you a lot quicker than I would vote for Kamala Harris by virtue of the fact that you are a mother.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Although I don't want to be the president, I would never, ever, ever go out for that job. It's just too rough. But you know what? Vem Miller, founder of the America Happens Network. So great to have you here today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your time.
All right. So coming up, what's up with this fairy tale representation of Kamala Harris? I'll tell you up next.